Welcome to another tutorial by request of Laser King 117. He would want to know how to make this quick little logo animation, the crispy media. And he was interested in how to do this. So I said, if you give me a couple hours, I'm about to get it tooled up for you. So let's make one right now. I'll right click here and go new comp. I'm going to call this animation 1920 by 1080, 30 frames per second, 10 seconds. Okay. Put this into this folder here. And let's drag down this GIF or GIF and make it the same size as the comp. You can do that by hitting Ctrl-Alt-Shift-H, or you can right click, transform, fit to comp width or height. And now we can use this as a bit of a guide. So to start off with, we watch as this circle animates on, and then as the circle finishes, this aperture symbol scales in, and then the whole symbol begins moving and rotating as it scales out, and this wheel shape scales in. You can see we even got this extra little line that animates around as the wheel spins, and the wheel comes to a stop as this crispy media is animated in as the wheel spins across, and then the spoke or hubcap or whatever animates out as this stream of glaze comes down and covers most of the circle, creating like a glazed donut sort of look. I'm going to create a new shape layer. So if I come up here and I grab this ellipse tool, if you keep pressing Q, it will cycle through. Also, if you hold click on this, it'll bring up the tools. We want the ellipse tool. If I press the apostrophe or come down here and press title action safe and turn that on, we'll get this here. And this is the very center of the comp. So if we click in here and drag, and if we hold Control and Shift, it'll create a perfect circle, which is exactly what we want. Doesn't matter how big it is, it's tiny at the moment, but that's okay. We'll come down here to the ellipse path, and we can change the size here. What we want to do now is we want to get rid of the fill and leave the stroke there. I'm now going to change the position. We can use this as a guide. And I'm going to bring this circle here over. I'm actually going to change the position. Okay. Now I'm going to rename this circle. Now the way that this animates on goes a little bit like this. If I click on the contents here, I can press add and go trim parts. Now watch what happens as I change this start value as it animates like this. And that's exactly how it animates on the original, but it starts from here, not from up the top. So if I move this a little bit so we know that this is where it's starting from, we can actually adjust the offset by minus 90 degrees. And now it starts from here, and that's what we want. So we'll go back to here where it starts, and we'll set a keyframe, and then we'll go to the end where it should finish about here, and we'll turn this to 0. Now if we grab these and press F9, I can now have these keyframes selected and go into the graph editor by pressing this button here. I can zoom in. I'll go edit value graph, and now what we're seeing here is 100%. This is this first keyframe sitting at 100%, and then as we move across time, it stops at 0%, which is where the animation finishes, and this is where our keyframes are, and this is the graph editor. Now what we can do with these handles here is we can actually adjust these so that the animation finishes or starts off quicker or slower. We can change the speed of everything. So what I want it to do is I want it to start off slow, and I want it to I want it to start off quick, sorry, and then finish off slow. Like so. Actually, I might actually do it the other way around so that it finishes quickly, and then as soon as it gets to that, I can do it like this. Okay. So now it looks a little bit like this, where you can see it ends up finishing really quick. But that's okay, because now we can bring in that aperture. So I've got up here this aperture.eps, and if I bring this into the comp, this is what it looks like. If we right click on this, we can go create and create shapes from vector layer, and what this is going to do is it's going to turn this off, so we can delete this now, and then it's going to create this shape layer where we can actually adjust the fill. And now we've got this, and in the contents here we've got 6 groups, and each one of these groups represents one of these little triangles. Now the gap in the original footage is actually a lot smaller than the aperture gap that we've got in this. I'm going to rename this aperture. But that's not a huge deal, and if we really wanted to, we could go into the groups and actually adjust each one of them individually by selecting these and moving them across and doing all sorts of bullshit, but we're not going to worry about that for now. We're just going to leave it as it is. So if we bring this aperture over now, if you grab this from this center point here and bring this over here while holding control, it'll actually snap to the middle of this circle. And now we can go into here and we can actually adjust the scale of everything so that it sits like this, which is what we want. We can go here to the rotation as well and rotate it, because it's actually sitting like this in the original. Okay, so what happens now is the circle animates on, and right before the circle has finished animating on, this aperture kind of scales in like this. It kind of goes like this, but you actually can't see any of the stuff that's happening outside of this circle area here. So we're actually going to do a quick technique involving a mat, so that we can animate just the scale here of this aperture, but then we won't end up seeing anything outside of this circle. So what we'll do is I'll duplicate this circle, I'll bring it to the top, I'm going to call this aperture matte, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the label color to none. I just like to have it grey here, it doesn't get in the way, it's good to go. So I'm going to come down here and I'm actually going to turn off this trim parts, we don't want that anymore, and I'm going to delete the stroke as well. Now if I go to this ellipse and select this, I can go add fill, and right now we've got this red fill. If I turn this up so that the circle is identical to the diameter of the other circle, then anywhere here is where we want the aperture symbol to be, and then anywhere this red isn't is where we don't want the aperture to be. So what I can actually do now is if I go and select this aperture layer here, I can set this to alpha matte. Now if I animate the scale of this, you can see that it's not going to appear outside of the circle, and that is exactly what we want. So I'm going to set a keyframe for the scale here and set it to be too big. I'm going to come forward 10 frames and then animate it in so it's the exact same size here. I can select both these keyframes and press F9, Also, one thing I want to do is grab this aperture matte and this and pick whip the circle. So now no matter where I move this circle, everything's going to move with it. And that's important because this ends up rolling along like we saw before. Okay, so now this animates in like so. One thing I also noticed in the original is that it keyframes and rotates as it goes along. So we actually want it to rotate like this. I'm going to change this to 90. Move it across and press F9. Now what I want to do with these keyframes here is go back into the graph editor, and we're still on the value graph, but I want this to animate out slowly and in quickly, so I can grab both these values and drag them down like this. And now because this circle finishes animating really snappy, then this aperture can scale in really snappy, but then slowly animate out. So now as we watch this, we'll put some motion blur on all of it, turn it on, and now if we watch this, we've got this. And that looks cool. So what happens now is this circle ends up rotating and moving along while revealing the text. It also ends up spinning and revealing this wheel shape, and then the donut glaze comes down. So what we can do is we can grab this circle here and press P to bring up position. If we just check here on the original so we can see what happens, it starts moving about here. So we'll turn this off. We'll go and set a keyframe for the position, and when does this stop moving? It's about here. And now we can bring this over and just have it stop here. We can turn this off for now. Select both those keyframes, press F9, and now if we go into the graph editor again, when you're dealing with position, you can't actually use the value graph. You can't grab any handles and move things around, and that's because there's two values that we're working with, and for whatever reason After Effects just struggles and it doesn't let you do it. But if we go to the speed graph, you can see this is a different kind of graph that dictates how fast things are moving. So at this point here, it's not moving at all, and then it starts moving really quickly, and then as it gets to here, it's moving at a constant rate, and then the movement speed slows down as it gets towards the end. So it speeds up, is at a constant rate, and then slows down, and then here it's stopped. But what we can do here is we can actually grab these handles, and what we want it to do is we want it to speed up slowly, but then slow down even slower. So if we grab this handle here and really slow down that end, and then slow down the beginning just a little bit, it now starts slower, gets really quick at this point, and then slows down nicely at the end. And if we watch this, this is what it does, and that's what we want. We also want it to rotate at the exact same point, so we'll set a keyframe here for the rotation, and then change this to 1. Just leave it as 1 for now. We can press F9, and if we select both of these, we can try and get the speed of the rotation to be the same as the speed of the movement. And as long as this apex point of the curve here is at the same point as the speed, it should end up looking okay. So if we watch this now, it rolls. Beautiful. That's exactly what we want. Alright. Okay. So while this is moving, we notice in the original that the aperture scales out and this wheel scales in. And that happens as soon as it starts moving. So we'll turn this off. And what we can do here for the aperture is we can set a keyframe here for the scale and the rotation. We'll go forward 10 frames, and then we can scale this up and also change this back to, what was it on? started off at 90, so we'll put it back to 90. Okay, that's fine. And now we can go to the graph editor for this and kind of do the same thing with the speed. If you hold shift, it won't move like this so easy, it kind of snaps. And we kind of want to get rid of it quickly. Okay, now while this is happening, the wheel scales in. And we basically want the wheel to have the same mat so that it doesn't go too far, but we might not have to worry about that. I've got this car wheel EPS, and if I bring this down and right click, create shapes, I can delete this one. I'm going to call this wheel, and I'm going to make it white. Now what we can do here inside the contents is this group 2 is this outside, and we don't want that, we just want this middle bit of the wheel. And it's not identical to the original, but it's close enough. If we hold Alt and then open bracket, it actually trims layers to where the playhead is. It'll trim the start, and if I go to here and hold Alt and press end bracket, it'll trim that. We don't want to do that though. What we can do now is if we hold Control, like we were at the earlier, we can get it to snap at the middle of this circle. What we want to do again is parent this to the circle so that it moves with it. As you can see, it moves and rolls along with it. I'll put on motion blur so it looks like it's doing the exact same thing. And now I'll set a keyframe for the scale. I'll move this to the end and move this to the right size, and then I'll come here and set this to 0. I can grab these keyframes and press F9 and try and follow the same sort of curve that the scale is for the aperture, and it is. And now if we watch this, the wheel scales in alongside the aperture, and that looks good. Cool. Also, while this thing is rolling, we have that little line that goes around on the outside of the circle. And what we can do here is we'll have it start here. We can duplicate this circle and bring it above the wheel. And if we bring the beginning of the circle to here, so we'll take it back to here and we'll parent this circle. We can then uncheck position, uncheck all of this stuff, and then bring it to the playhead. If we go into here now, we can grab this trim paths. We'll just turn that to 0. We can adjust the scale. I'm just going to turn motion blur off for now so I can see what I'm doing. I'll leave it like this. I can turn the stroke down to like 2 because I'm pretty sure it was really small. If we go to the end of the animation here, we'll just make sure that this line is in between the outside circle and the edge of the rim exactly. So sit it about there. And now we can animate the trim paths. So we'll go here. I'm just going to call this line. I'll go to the trim paths effect and I'll set this to 100. I'll set a keyframe. I'll go forward 4 frames and set this to 0. I can also go to the end, set a keyframe, and then change that to 0. And now if I slightly offset these and press F9 on all of them, you can see we've got this animated line that goes around with it. Unfortunately, I've messed this up and they are going the opposite direction to what I want, so all I have to do is inverse the values on these keyframes, and now it should be spinning the way I want it to. And it is. If we turn motion blur on, it's definitely hard to see this line. that is there. I can offset these a little bit more and it will make the line longer, like so. That looks good to me. Oops. Okay, we've got this. Bam, the line, everything stops right here. And now we can check the original and see what happens to this wheel. You can see it animates off in that radial pattern. Alright, we're going to get a little bit complicated here, but this should look good. We're going to grab this wheel and we're going to add an effect onto this called radial wipe. Now, if I bring this wipe center, you can see this wipe center is here. We want this wipe center to be in the middle. So we can move this over and I'll show you what this does. Radial wipe does this. It wipes on or off in a radial pattern from where that center is. But because this wheel is moving and this center point does not move, we want to make sure that this point here is always sticking to the middle of this wheel. But we can't do that unless we set an expression. So at this point here, the circle has stopped moving. If we go up to this wheel here, we can actually hold Alt and click on this wipe center. And right now we have the opportunity to type in whatever the fuck we want into this text here. But what we want to do is we want to keyframe the position of the circle. So you can actually grab this pick whip here for the wipe center and drag it down to the position of the circle. And this is going to add a little expression here that basically says, look into this comp, the animation comp, and then look for the layer called circle, which is this one. Find its transform properties, then find its position property, and then copy that value exactly. So now, if we have this selected, we can go along and you'll see that this is changing over time and it's exactly the same as the position value 1107.5, 1107.5, and now it's following it. Perfect. So it gets to the end here, and by this endpoint here we want this wheel bit here to be completely gone. So we'll set this to 100%. We'll change the feather to maybe 15, and you can see how this smooths it out a bit. We will set a keyframe for the completion, and we'll just go back 10 frames and then change this to 0. I can select these and press F9. If I go into the graph editor again, I can select both. I can just adjust, sorry, the way that this looks. Maybe we want it to be a little bit longer. Okay, cool. What we can do as well is we probably want this line here to finish where the spoke here finishes. So we can actually go to the offset of this line. And since there's no keyframe on it, we can adjust it freely and just set it to 0. And now the line is going to move alongside the wipe. And it's just a little thing that you would only pick up on subconsciously, but I think it makes it look nicer. Now at this point here, the glazing that comes down onto the donut is almost touching it at this point here. And if we look at the original, you can see that by the time this thing stops rolling, as soon as it stops rolling, the glazing hits it, and that's what we want. So let's go back here, we'll watch it, we'll see how it looks. Okay, so as soon as it hits this point here is when we want the glazing to be on it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to duplicate this circle again. It's Control D. I'm going to bring this to the top. I'm going to call this glazing. and I'm going to press U to bring up all of the keyframes, and I'm just going to turn them all off. I'll come to this trim paths and delete it, and I will delete this stroke here. I'm going to add a fill. I want this fill to be white, and I'm going to go to the ellipse path and just make this even bigger. You notice that in the original the glazing goes beyond the boundaries of this circle. So I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger. And now what we can do is we can duplicate this ellipse. Bring this here. And now we can make this one much smaller. If I turn this off, we can see what we're doing here, and I'll bring that to about there. Okay, now we've got these two ellipses here. One looks like this, and the other one looks like this. And this ellipse here is actually going to create the hole for the glazing to make it look like a donut. And if we click on contents here and go add merge paths, it'll automatically add 3 effects. One is merge paths, one is stroke, and one is fill. We delete the stroke because that doesn't need to be there. And if we go into the merge path settings, we can change the mode to exclude interactions. And that's going to look at where these two here overlap, and wherever they overlap, it's going to create a hole. So now we've got our donut. What we can do now is leave this ellipse, which is the hole, as it is, but we can come to this one and right click on the path and press convert to Bezier path. Now if we bring back up our path visuals here, we can actually press G or come up here and click the pen tool, and this is where we can change the way our glazing looks. And you see as I adjust this, this is where we can really create some cool glazing. I'm going to just adjust some values here, move these handles around. I'm not looking at the original, I won't copy it exactly the way it is, but as you can see we've got some glazing, and we're just going to make it look a little bit like this. Okay, bring this down a bit more. Okay, I might actually bring this out a bit. Okay, that works for me. We've got our glazing, that looks nice, and we can actually turn the opacity back up to 100. So this is what our final donut is going to look like. But what we want to do is we actually want this big stream to come down and fill up our donut. And the easiest way to do this, so that we don't have to worry about multiple layers and more mats and all that sort of stuff, is we can actually change the way that this top glaze here looks by adding a few extra points. So if I add a point here and I add a point here, then I can drag this up to the top of the comp. I can stretch this out a bit. What I might actually do is create 2, and I will hold Alt and click on these to get rid of the Bezier handles because I don't want them anymore. And I'll add 2 more here and drag them down like this. And now we've got this stream that comes down and puts the glaze on the donut. Obviously this isn't animated yet, but we're going to worry about that now. So when the donut stops moving is when the glazing hits it exactly. So at this point here, at this end keyframe where the circle stops moving, is where we want the glazing to first touch down on the donut. So what we're going to do is we are going to create one quick simple mat that is going to animate this glazing layer on. So if we duplicate this and we can call this glazing matte, I will change it to grey again. And what we can do is we can come into the, I'll delete this. I'll delete the merge parts and I'll delete this fill. And now we've just got this, and now I can animate the path. So if you look at the original, you can see how it animates on. It actually comes down, touches it, and then you can see how it animates down like this. And then it slowly reveals that hole. I'm going to turn this off for now, and we're going to try and copy that. So what I can do here is just completely delete this, and I'll add a new group. Inside this group, I'll add a new path, and also inside the group, I'll add a new fill. It's going to end up looking red, but that's okay. So for now, I'm going to create a few lines like this, and then just create a box. Notice this is red. And what I'm going to do with this is, it's at this point here that this entire thing ends up touching down on the donut. So I can bring this up to the top here. I'm going to set a keyframe for the path. I'm going to go back 10 keyframes and then move all of these up like this. Just turn motion blur off for now. And now you can see that over the course of 10 frames, this red comes down and touches the donut. Now we can go forward another 10 frames. If you hold shift and press page down, it will actually go forward exactly 10 frames. And now we can bring these values here so that they're way down here. And we can bring these so that they end here, and then bring these values all the way down here. Cool. And now it's going to kind of animate like this. And I know that looks crap, but we can select these all and press F9, and then if we go into the speed graph, we can grab these and bring them up to here. Looks like an M. And then we can kind of do a bit of this. Now it will start off slow. It's difficult when you're mucking around with the speed graph because it's really hard to tell when things are looking nice and smooth. The value graph is so much better, but obviously when we're dealing with a path, one keyframe doesn't really explain exactly where the path is. It's hard to explain, but you'll understand it in due time, I'm sure. Now what we can do is we can turn this off, set this to alpha matte, and now this glazing here is only going to appear where this glazing matte is, and you can see now this animates on like this. We can turn back on motion blur, and now it looks like this. What we can do is, since things seem to be a bit quick, if you select all of the keyframes and then hold Alt and then drag on the last keyframe, it actually extends them all out at the right ratio. Cool. So now everything looks like this. So we've got our animation, and I think that looks nice. All we want to worry about now is the text. So I've already gone out and found out that the text is Roboto, or at least very close to. And I'm going to just look at this to try and match the text. So I'm going to press Control T, and that will bring up the text tool. And I can type crispy in all caps. If I click on this layer here and go down here, I can change this to bold, because I'm pretty sure it's bold. I can turn the size up here. I'm just going to change the color to something different so that I can tell what I'm doing. And now I can just keep messing around with the size and we'll try and get it to match. Now there's a few things you can do to try and get things to match font wise as we're going along with settings such as the text height and the distance that the letters are apart from each other. They've all got specific names that I can't remember at the moment, but that's okay. This is close enough. We're just going to leave it like that. I'll make it white. Now we've also got this media down here, but this A here is on a slant and I haven't found a font that has an A specifically like that, so we're going to cheat it a bit here. But I'm going to type here MEDI. I can now change this to light. I will make it a different color again so I can see what I'm doing. And now I'm just going to turn the size down. I can turn the height down and also the width of the font. I might just leave it at 100. I can move it along here. And now I can just change the distance between the letters down. I think it's called kerning. And now that sits there, and that looks okay. I'm going to make it white. I'm going to duplicate it. I'll double click and just press A. If I hold shift, I can drag this along and get it to match with this A. And what I'm going to do is put an effect on this A called transform. Within this transform effect, we've got a skew, and this skew kind of changes the way the A looks. It stretches it out depending on which way this skew axis is angled. I'm going to change this to 90 and it will skew like this. We basically want to worry about making sure that this line here on the A, which I'll change the color of again now, is completely vertical. If you press Ctrl R, you can bring out a guide to kind of help make sure that it's perfectly straight. And now we can move this A back over. Now I understand that it's not completely the same, and I don't know what font they've used, so it could be completely different, but this is close enough for what we want. And if you're making your own logo and you wanted to have an A like that, I'm sure that you wouldn't be thrown off by an extra angle. Anyway, we've got our text here and we can solo this and see what it looks like, and I think that looks good. And all we need to do now is select all of these and press Ctrl Shift C, and we'll call this text. Move all attributes, and now it's going to be in its own pre-comp. I can bring this down to the very bottom. I'll turn this off. And now what we can do is we can use this circle here as a mat for the text. If I duplicate this and bring this just above the text, I'm going to call it text mat. I'll make it grey again. And I can actually go here and leave the position keyframes where they are, but get rid of the rotation keyframes and then get rid of the... I'll go into here and I'll delete the trim paths. Okay, if I come into here, I can actually get rid of the stroke, come here and then add a fill. And if I solo just this and the circle, I can make sure, just turn the transparency down, that the circle is the same size. And in fact, I actually want it to be a bit bigger, like this. I can add a fast blur onto the red circle just a little bit, and now I can turn this off, and now we've got this. But what I want to do is come down here to the ellipse path and right click and convert to Bezier path, and what that allows me to do now is change the path. This is like what we did before, and I can bring these handles here. I can actually alt click on these to stop them from being Bezier handles and just make them straight. I'll bring this to the edge of the comp and just make these lines straight from what I can tell. And that will do. And now you can see that this still moves like this, and it still has its motion blur. But what we're going to do is tell the text to only exist where this red isn't. And I think we should be able to do that by changing the mode on this text here to alpha inverted. Change these here a little. And that should be okay. Can't see any text. I'm going to change the transparency for this back up to 100. And now it reveals the text the way I want it to reveal. Comes down and covers the donut. And one last thing that we have to do is animate this glazing matte so that when it finishes, this also comes down and stops on the donut. You can alt click and it will toggle between having Bezier handles and not having them. We can try and match this circle as best as we can. Doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, that looks good to me. Bam. Now if we watch this whole thing, this is the finished animation. We can bring this along a bit further and just make it smoother. And there we have it. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, maybe subscribe. There's plenty more tutorials to come. Enjoy.